back here, you worthless girl!" screamed the woman as the old cowboy watched a black girl stumble past his porch, fresh bruises marking her trembling arms. Another day of beatings from her in-laws who blamed her for every misfortune. The townspeople whispered she'd never escape the Connor family's grip, destined to die forgotten in their dusty streets. But the weathered giant studying her from his rocking chair saw something others missed, intelligence flickering behind her fear. Years ago, he'd lost his own daughter to similar cruelty and swore never to watch it happen again. Now this broken girl represented his chance at redemption, though saving her would expose secrets that could destroy them both. The Connors weren't just cruel. They were hiding something deadly about her husband's death. Would his intervention finally bring justice, or would it unleash a darkness that would consume them all? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The copper mine whistle pierced the morning air across Millbrook, Colorado. Another day of back-breaking labor awaited the men trudging toward the entrance. Their wives gathered water from the well while children swept dust from wooden porches. Eunice Harper moved differently than the others. Her steps were careful, measured, as if each movement might bring punishment. Dark bruises covered her forearms. A cut above her left eyebrow had scabbed over from yesterday's encounter. She carried 2 heavy water buckets toward the Connor house. The weight made her shoulders ache, but she dared not rest. Martha Connor would be watching from the kitchen window. Buck McCree sat on his porch whittling a piece of pine. His weathered hands moved with precision. His eyes, however, followed Eunice's painful progress down the dirt road. This was the 4th morning he'd witnessed the same routine. The girl was smart. He could tell from the way she calculated the distance between houses, avoided certain townspeople, and chose her path to minimize confrontation. Most beaten animals just cowered. This one still planned. Martha Connor's voice erupted from inside the house. Eunice quickened her pace. Buck had seen enough broken spirits in his 63 years. During his time as territorial judge, he'd witnessed humanity's capacity for cruelty. But something about this girl reminded him of Sarah. His daughter's face flickered in his memory before he pushed it away. The Connor house squatted at the end of Main Street like a toad. Paint peeled from its walls. The porch sagged under the weight of accumulated neglect. 3 generations of Connors had called it home, each meaner than the last. Eunice disappeared inside. Shouting followed immediately. James Connor emerged first, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. His brothers flanked him like hunting dogs. They enjoyed their morning ritual of public humiliation. Eunice stumbled out, clutching her shoulder. Fresh, tears mixed with the dust on her cheeks. "Clumsy girl spilled water on the clean floor," Martha announced to anyone within earshot. Several townspeople gathered. They always did. Entertainment was scarce in Millbrook. Buck set down his whittling knife. "Maybe she needs better instruction," someone called out. Laughter rippled through the small crowd. James Connor grabbed Eunice's wrist. "My brother died because of your carelessness. Every day you breathe is a gift you don't deserve." Eunice kept her eyes downcast, but Buck noticed her lips moving silently. She was counting, measuring time until the ordeal ended. "Speak up when I'm talking to you," James demanded. "Yes, sir." Her voice barely carried across the street. Louder. "Yes, sir." The crowd began to disperse. The show was ending. People had work to do. But Buck remained on his porch. He'd heard enough legal testimony to recognize patterns. The Connors were performing for the town, establishing their version of events, making sure everyone knew Eunice's place in their hierarchy. That evening, Buck visited the general store. Old Pete Morrison had run it for 30 years. He knew every family's business. "Terrible shame about young Thomas Connor," Buck said, examining a bag of flour. Pete nodded gravely. "Mining accident took him 6 months back. Left that girl with nothing." "What kind of accident?" "Cave-in. Thomas was checking the new shaft when the support beams failed. Eunice should have packed his lunch with more care. Poor nutrition makes a man weak." Buck raised an eyebrow. "His lunch caused a structural collapse?" Pete shrugged. "That's what the family says. Girl's been paying for her mistake ever since." Buck purchased his flour and walked home. The story had holes large enough to drive a wagon through. 3 days later, he witnessed the town square incident. Eunice knelt in the dirt, surrounded by scattered vegetables. A torn burlap sack lay beside her. Martha Connor stood over her, with righteous fury painted across her face. "Stealing food from honest families," Martha declared. "This is what happens when people don't know their place." Buck approached the circle of onlookers. He could see what others missed. The vegetables were wilted, partially rotten, scraps that would normally feed pigs. "Found her behind Murphy's restaurant," James added, "filling her bag with garbage like some kind of animal." Eunice's hands shook as she tried to gather the scattered food. Her thin frame suggested she rarely ate properly. "String her up!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "Now, that's too harsh," James replied with mock reasonableness. "But she needs to learn." He drew back his hand. Buck stepped forward. "That's enough!" The crowd turned. Buck's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His 6-foot frame cast a long shadow across the dirt. "This is family business, stranger," James said. "I'm Buck McCree. Your neighbor." His eyes never left James's raised hand. "And I'm making it my business." Martha Connor's face reddened. "She's our responsibility, our burden to bear." Buck looked down at Eunice. For the first time, she met his gaze directly. Intelligence blazed behind her fear. Sharp, calculating intelligence that had been carefully hidden. "Not anymore," Buck said quietly. "According to Territorial Statute 47, Section 12, any adult being subjected to systematic abuse can be legally adopted by a willing party to remove them from dangerous circumstances." Silence fell over the square. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. James Connor's mouth hung open. "You can't just steal our property." "She's not property. She's a human being. And as of this moment, she's under my legal protection." Buck extended his hand toward Eunice. She stared at it like it might disappear. "The adoption will be filed with territorial authorities tomorrow morning," Buck continued. "Until then, she stays with me." Eunice took his hand and stood. Her grip was stronger than he expected. The Connors would not forgive this humiliation. Buck had just declared war on one of Millbrook's most established families. But looking at the girl beside him, he knew he'd made the right choice. Some battles were worth fighting. Buck's cabin sat on the outskirts of town, modest but clean. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that actually let in light. Eunice stood in the doorway, uncertain. "Go on," Buck said gently. "It's safe." She stepped inside like she was entering a church. Her fingers traced the edge of a wooden table, testing its reality. Buck poured water into a basin. "Clean yourself up. There's soap and fresh towels." When she emerged, the transformation was remarkable. Without dirt and fear masking her features, Eunice looked younger, maybe 22 or 23. Her eyes held sharp intelligence that had been carefully hidden. "Can you read?" Buck asked. She nodded slowly. He handed her a newspaper. She scanned the front page in seconds, her eyes moving with practiced efficiency. This wasn't someone who stumbled through words. "Where did you learn?" "My husband taught me. Thomas had books." Her voice grew stronger with each sentence. "I kept them hidden after he died." Buck pulled a thick leather volume from his shelf. "Legal codes and territorial statutes. What do you make of this?" Eunice studied the pages carefully. "These are laws about property ownership, and this section covers inheritance rights." She looked up. "You weren't guessing about that adoption statute, were you?" "No, I wasn't. Who are you really?" Buck settled into his chair by the fireplace. The time for half-truths had passed. "I served as territorial judge for 12 years. Presided over land disputes, mining claims, criminal cases. Built a reputation for fairness." His voice grew quiet. "Had a daughter named Sarah. She married young, moved to a settlement near Denver." Eunice waited. "Her husband's family treated her like the Connors treat you. I was too busy with court business to notice the signs. Too proud of my position to see what was happening under my nose." The fire crackled in the silence. "Found her body in a creek. They claimed she fell. Bruises on her neck suggested otherwise. Buck's hands clenched. But I couldn't prove murder. The family had witnesses, money, influence. What happened to them? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. His voice carried decades of regret. I resigned from the bench that day. Couldn't look at another legal brief knowing the system had failed my own daughter. Eunice absorbed this information. So you came here to hide? I came here to die quietly. Then I saw you. She studied his weathered face. And I reminded you of Sarah. At first, but you're different. Stronger. You've survived 6 months of what killed her in 3. Eunice moved to the window. The Connor house was visible in the distance, squatting like a malignant growth. They killed my husband too, she said simply. Buck went very still. Explain. Thomas found something in the mine. Financial records hidden in his supervisor's office. The Connors were stealing from the operation, skimming copper, selling it privately, cheating the workers out of wages. What kind of proof? Eunice disappeared into the bedroom. She returned with a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were ledger pages, correspondence, and detailed notes written in neat handwriting. Thomas was going to report them to territorial authorities. He told me the night before he died. Her voice hardened. Next morning, the mine shaft collapsed, but only on him. Buck examined the documents. His legal mind processed the implications quickly. This wasn't just theft. It was systematic fraud on a massive scale. The cave-in was planned. The support beams were sabotaged. I went to the mine after the funeral, saw the cut marks myself. She pointed to sketches in the margins of her notes. Someone wanted Thomas dead. Why didn't you take this to the sheriff? Sheriff Morrison is James Connor's cousin. The whole town protects the family. They own half the businesses and employ most of the men. Buck set down the papers. Everything made sense now. The public humiliation, the systematic abuse. They weren't just punishing Eunice for her husband's death. They were ensuring she stayed broken and silent. They're afraid of what you know. They should be. Buck smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. This girl wasn't a victim waiting for rescue. She was a witness preparing for justice. How much evidence do you have? Eunice produced 3 more bundles from various hiding places around the cabin. Financial records, witness statements, even photographs Thomas had taken of the mining operation. I've been documenting everything for 6 months. Every theft, every lie, every bruise they gave me. She spread the papers across the table like a general planning battle. I was waiting for the right moment. What moment? When someone with legal authority would listen. Buck studied the evidence. It was comprehensive, detailed, and absolutely damning. With his knowledge of territorial law and her investigative work, they could destroy the Connor family completely. There's something else, Eunice said. Other families in town are suffering too. The Connors have been systematically cheating everyone. She showed him records of doctored mining reports, stolen wages, and fraudulent land deals. The corruption went back years. They're not just murderers. They're parasites bleeding this whole community dry. Buck looked at this remarkable young woman who had transformed from victim to prosecutor in the space of a few hours. Sarah had been gentle, trusting. Eunice was steel wrapped in silk. What do you want to do about it? I want to make them pay for everything. Thomas's death, the stolen wages, the suffering of innocent people. Her eyes blazed with righteous fury. I want justice. That will require going to court, facing them publicly. The whole town will be watching. Good. Let them watch me destroy their heroes. Buck felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for Eunice, but for the possibility that justice might actually prevail. Then we'd better get started. The Connors won't wait long to challenge the adoption. Eunice smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Let them come. I'll be ready. 3 days after the adoption announcement, lawyer Benjamin Crosswick arrived on the morning stage. His expensive suit and polished boots marked him as big city legal talent. The Connors had invested serious money in their counterattack. Buck watched from his porch as Crosswick met with the Connor family. Their animated gestures suggested desperation masked as confidence. "They're moving faster than expected," Eunice observed. She sat beside him, reviewing her evidence files. Desperate people make mistakes. That afternoon, Sheriff Morrison delivered the official challenge papers. The adoption would face judicial review in 1 week. Crosswick had petitioned the territorial court, claiming Buck was mentally incompetent and Eunice was legally bound property. "Property," Buck muttered, scanning the documents. They actually used that word. Eunice's jaw tightened. Let them. It shows their true nature. Buck studied Crosswick's arguments. The lawyer was skilled but overconfident. He'd built his case on outdated precedents and territorial customs rather than current law. "He's fighting the wrong battle," Buck said. "Crosswick thinks this is about traditional property rights. He doesn't know we have evidence of murder." "Should we tell him?" "No. Let them prepare for the wrong war." That evening, Mary Sullivan knocked on their door. She cleaned houses for several families in town, including the Connors. Her nervous demeanor suggested important information. "I heard what you did for Eunice," Mary said quietly. "Took courage." Buck invited her inside. Mary glanced around nervously before speaking. "The Connors aren't just angry. They're terrified." She pulled a crumpled paper from her apron. "Found this in James's wastebasket." The note was written in James's handwriting, instructions to destroy specific mining records and relocate certain equipment. Someone was covering tracks quickly. "There's more," Mary continued. "They sent word to their cousin in Denver, the one who works for the Territorial Mining Commission. He's coming to town." Eunice and Buck exchanged glances. Political connections meant potential corruption at higher levels. "How many people know about our evidence?" Eunice asked. "Just us," Buck replied, "and it stays that way until court." Mary left after accepting payment for the intelligence. Buck locked the door and pulled the curtains closed. "We need to accelerate our timeline," he said. "If they're destroying evidence, we have to preserve what's left." Eunice nodded toward her hidden documentation. "Everything Thomas found is already copied, but there might be more in the mining office." "Too dangerous. They'll be watching for exactly that kind of move. Then we use their paranoia against them." Buck raised an eyebrow. "They're destroying evidence because they're afraid of what we might find. But panicked people make noise. Others will notice." She was right. The Connors' frantic cleanup efforts would draw attention from workers and townspeople who had previously ignored suspicious activity. The next morning brought confirmation of Eunice's prediction. Pete Morrison mentioned seeing unusual activity at the mine after hours. Smoke rising from areas that should have been empty. Men carrying boxes and burning papers. "Looks like spring cleaning," Pete said with a knowing wink. "Awful lot of cleaning for folks who never seemed concerned about tidiness before." Word spread quickly through Millbrook's gossip network. The Connors' secretive behavior was generating exactly the kind of curiosity they hoped to avoid. Buck spent the afternoon in his study, preparing legal arguments. Eunice worked at the kitchen table, organizing evidence and creating timeline charts that would make the fraud pattern clear to any judge. Her organizational skills impressed him. Every document was categorized, dated, and cross-referenced. She'd built a prosecutor's dream case. "Where did you learn investigation techniques?" Buck asked. "Thomas taught me bookkeeping. The rest came from watching you work." "Watching me?" "You've been asking careful questions around town for weeks, testing people's stories, looking for inconsistencies." She smiled. "I recognize method when I see it." Buck realized she was right. His judicial instincts had been guiding his behavior since arriving in Millbrook. Old habits from years of evaluating testimony and evidence. "You'd make a fine lawyer yourself." "Maybe someday, after we finish this business." That evening brought another visitor. Tom Bradley worked the mine's day shift and had served as Thomas's assistant before his death. "Heard about the court case," Tom said nervously. "Thought you should know something." He described the morning of Thomas's accident, details that contradicted the official story. Thomas went into that shaft alone, but he wasn't supposed to. Someone changed the work assignments at the last minute, sent his usual partner to a different section. "Who made the change?" Buck asked. Supervisor Williams said it came from James Connor directly. More pieces fell into place. The accident wasn't random. Someone had deliberately isolated Thomas in the most dangerous part of the mine. Williams still around? Tom shook his head. Left town 2 days after the funeral. Said he was moving to California for his health. Another convenient disappearance. But Tom's testimony would help establish premeditation. Will you testify in court? Eunice asked. Tom hesitated. The Connors employ half this town. Speaking against them could cost me everything. Not speaking could cost others their lives, Buck said firmly. How many more Thomas Harpers have to die for Connor profits? Tom looked at Eunice's determined face. You really think you can beat them? I know we can, she replied, but we need honest people willing to tell the truth. Tom nodded slowly. Then I'll testify. Thomas was a good man. He deserved better. After Tom left, Buck and Eunice reviewed their growing list of witnesses and evidence. The case was becoming stronger by the day. Crosswick thinks he's defending traditional property rights, Buck mused. He has no idea he's representing murderers and thieves. Good. Let him stay confident until it's too late. Eunice gathered the scattered papers and returned them to their hiding places. Her movements were efficient, purposeful. The frightened girl from the town square had become a formidable woman with a mission. 1 week until court, Buck said. 1 week until justice. They both knew the Connors would make desperate moves as the trial approached. Desperate people were dangerous, but they were also careless, and carelessness would be the Connors' downfall. Judge Harrison arrived from Denver on Thursday's stage 2 days before the scheduled hearing. His reputation for fairness had preceded him, which explained why the Connors looked increasingly nervous at his appointment. Buck recognized Harrison from territorial legal conferences, a man who valued evidence over politics and precedent over prejudice. The Connors' influence would carry little weight with him. Crosswick spent Thursday afternoon filing additional motions, desperate attempts to delay or relocate the proceedings. Harrison denied them all with minimal commentary. Friday morning brought unexpected developments. 3 more mine workers approached Buck's cabin after their shift ended. Word was spreading that someone was finally willing to challenge the Connor family. We heard Tom Bradley is testifying, said Robert Chen, the shift foreman. Been waiting years for someone with backbone to stand up. Each man brought stories of wage theft, safety violations, and intimidation tactics. The pattern of abuse extended far beyond Eunice's situation. How long has this been going on? Buck asked. Since old man Connor took over the operation 5 years back, Robert replied. Things got worse after his son James started handling day-to-day business. Buck documented each testimony carefully. The scope of the Connor crimes was staggering. They threatened my family when I complained about missing wages, another worker added. Said accidents happened to troublemakers. Eunice listened from the kitchen table where she continued organizing evidence. Her expression grew darker with each revelation. Will you testify in court? She asked. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Fear warred with anger on their weathered faces. If you promise this won't be swept under the rug like everything else, Robert said finally. We can't afford to lose our jobs for nothing. This won't be for nothing, Buck assured them. Judge Harrison doesn't ignore evidence. That evening, Eunice made a troubling discovery while reviewing Thomas's hidden papers. Medical records from the company doctor showed suspicious patterns of injury reports. Look at this, she said, spreading the documents across the table. 7 mining accidents in the past 2 years, all involving men who had complained about working conditions. Buck studied the records. The injuries were severe enough to disable the workers permanently, but not fatal enough to trigger territorial investigations. Systematic intimidation, he concluded. Break the troublemakers, silence the rest. Thomas's death was just the most extreme example. Saturday evening brought their most important visitor yet. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the company physician, arrived after dark with a heavy medical bag and heavier conscience. I can't stay long, she said nervously, but I had to speak with you before the trial. Dr. Morrison was Pete's daughter, returned from medical school in the East. She'd been treating mining injuries for 6 months and had grown increasingly suspicious of the patterns. The Connor family pressured me to falsify injury reports, she admitted, made it clear my employment depended on cooperation. She produced copies of original medical examinations that contradicted the official versions filed with territorial authorities. Thomas Harper's body showed evidence of blunt force trauma before the cave-in, she said quietly. Someone struck him in the head with a heavy object. The falling rocks were secondary. Buck's jaw tightened. Murder, not accident. Why didn't you report this? Initially, James Connor was present during my examination. He dictated what I could include in the official report. Her hands shook slightly. I was terrified, but I kept private notes. Dr. Morrison's testimony would be devastating. Medical evidence of premeditated murder backed by expert analysis. Will you testify? Eunice asked. Yes, I became a doctor to help people, not cover up crimes. After Dr. Morrison left, Buck and Eunice reviewed their complete case file. The evidence was overwhelming from multiple angles: financial fraud, systematic intimidation, and premeditated murder. Crosswick has no idea what's coming, Buck observed. Good. Let them stay confident until the hammer falls. Sunday brought church services that neither Buck nor Eunice attended. The social dynamics were too volatile for public appearances. Instead, they spent the morning conducting final trial preparations. Eunice had transformed into a formidable legal strategist. Her questions were sharp, her organization flawless, her understanding of the evidence complete. You've learned quickly, Buck noted with admiration. I had a good teacher and strong motivation. Sunday afternoon brought their final pretrial visitor. Mary Sullivan returned with intelligence from her cleaning duties at the Connor house. They're planning something desperate, she reported. Heard James talking about making you disappear before tomorrow's hearing. Buck's expression hardened. What exactly did he say? Something about accidents happening to people who don't mind their own business, and how judges from Denver sometimes don't make it back home. The threats extended to both Buck and Judge Harrison. The Connors were planning violence to prevent the trial. We need to warn Harrison, Buck said. Already did. Sent word through my cousin who works at the hotel. The judge has been advised to take precautions. Eunice studied the situation with calculating eyes. Let them try. Threatening a territorial judge is a federal crime. It will only make our case stronger. If we survive to make our case. We will. I didn't endure 6 months of hell to die the night before justice. Buck recognized the steel in her voice. This young woman had found her strength and wouldn't be intimidated by Connor desperation. They spent Sunday evening in final preparation. Evidence organized, witness testimony coordinated, legal arguments polished. Buck felt the familiar pretrial mixture of anticipation and determination. Tomorrow changes everything, he said. Tomorrow we destroy them completely. Eunice's confidence was absolute. She'd survived the worst the Connors could inflict. Now she would return the favor through legal channels that they couldn't corrupt or intimidate. The girl who'd been beaten in the town square was gone. In her place sat a woman ready for war. Justice would finally come to Millbrook. The makeshift courtroom filled before dawn. Every resident of Millbrook wanted to witness the showdown between their most powerful family and the mysterious judge who'd challenged their authority. Judge Harrison entered precisely at 8 o'clock, his black robes commanding immediate silence. Buck and Eunice sat at the plaintiff's table, their evidence boxes stacked like ammunition. Crosswick strutted to the defense table with theatrical confidence. The Connor family filled the front row, their faces masks of righteous indignation. This hearing will determine the validity of an emergency adoption, Harrison announced. Mr. Crosswick, present your challenge. Crosswick rose dramatically. Your Honor, this adoption is a transparent attempt to steal property from its rightful owners. Miss Harper belongs to the Connor family under established territorial customs. His argument relied heavily on precedent and tradition, property rights, family obligations, the natural order of social hierarchy. Mr. McCree clearly suffers from mental deterioration, Crosswick continued. No rational man would interfere in family discipline matters. Buck remained calm throughout the performance. Crosswick was fighting exactly the battle they'd expected. "Mr. McCree, your response?" Buck stood slowly. "Your Honor, I invoke Territorial Statute 47, Section 12. Any adult subjected to systematic abuse may be legally adopted for protection purposes." He presented documentation of Eunice's injuries, witness statements about the public beatings, and medical evidence from Dr. Morrison. "Miss Harper has endured months of physical and psychological torture. The adoption removes her from immediate danger." Harrison reviewed the evidence carefully. "The statute appears applicable. However, Mr. Crosswick raises questions about your mental competence." "Then let me demonstrate my faculties through legal argument, Your Honor." Buck launched into a detailed analysis of territorial adoption law, citing cases and precedents with surgical precision. His 12 years as judge showed in every argument. Crosswick's confidence began to waver. This wasn't the rambling of a deteriorated mind. "Furthermore," Buck continued, "Miss Harper will present evidence that her situation extends far beyond simple family discipline." Eunice rose gracefully. Gone was the trembling victim from the town square. In her place stood a composed young woman with fire in her eyes. "Your Honor, I wish to present evidence of systematic criminal activity by the Connor family." Crosswick shot to his feet. "Objection. This hearing concerns adoption validity, not unsubstantiated accusations." "Overruled. I'll hear the evidence." Eunice spread financial documents across the evidence table with practiced efficiency. Her presentation was methodical, clear, and devastating. "The Connor family has been stealing from the mining operation for 3 years, skimming copper, falsifying production reports, and cheating workers out of wages." She displayed Thomas's hidden ledgers alongside official company records. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore. "My late husband discovered this fraud and planned to report it to territorial authorities. He died the next day in what was reported as a mining accident." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The Connor family shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Objection!" Crosswick bellowed. "These are serious accusations without proper foundation." "The foundation is sitting right there," Eunice replied, pointing to James Connor, "along with detailed evidence of premeditated murder." The courtroom erupted. Harrison pounded his gavel for order. Buck stepped forward. "Your Honor, we call Dr. Elizabeth Morrison to provide medical testimony." Dr. Morrison approached the witness area with visible nervousness, but her voice remained steady as she described Thomas's actual injuries. The deceased showed clear evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull before the cave-in occurred. Someone struck him with a heavy object, likely rendering him unconscious before the rocks fell. "Are you certain?" Harrison asked. "Absolutely. The wound patterns are inconsistent with falling debris. This was deliberate violence disguised as an accident." Crosswick attempted damage control. Dr. Morrison's inexperience makes her conclusions unreliable. "Then perhaps Mr. Williams, the mining supervisor, could clarify the circumstances," Buck suggested. "Oh wait, he left town immediately after the funeral. How convenient." Tom Bradley testified next, describing the suspicious work assignment changes that isolated Thomas in the dangerous shaft. His testimony established premeditation clearly. Robert Chen and the other miners followed, detailing years of wage theft, safety violations, and intimidation tactics. The scope of Connor criminality became undeniable. With each witness, the Connor family's composure crumbled further. James whispered urgently to Crosswick, who looked increasingly desperate. "Your Honor," Buck said formally, "the evidence shows systematic fraud, worker exploitation, and premeditated murder. Miss Harper wasn't just abused by her in-laws. She was being silenced by criminals who feared exposure." Eunice stepped forward for her final statement. "The Connors killed my husband to protect their theft operation. They tortured me to ensure my silence. They've terrorized this entire community for years." Her voice carried absolute conviction. "I'm not asking for protection anymore, Your Honor. I'm demanding justice for Thomas and every worker they've cheated." The courtroom fell silent. Even Harrison looked shaken by the evidence's magnitude. Crosswick made a last desperate attempt. "Your Honor, these accusations are politically motivated attacks on respected community leaders." Respected by whom? Eunice asked coldly. She gestured toward the packed courtroom. Ask these people about Connor respect. Faces throughout the room showed years of suppressed anger and fear. The community's true feelings were finally visible. Harrison studied the mountain of evidence: financial records, medical testimony, witness statements, and photographic documentation. The case was overwhelming. Mr. Crosswick, does your client wish to respond to these accusations? James Connor rose unsteadily. His face had turned pale during the testimony. Your Honor, these people are lying. They're trying to destroy our family's reputation. With forged financial records, falsified medical evidence, coordinated perjury involving dozens of witnesses? James had no answer. The evidence spoke for itself. Harrison set down his papers and looked directly at the Connor family. I've seen enough. This hearing has revealed criminal activity that demands immediate investigation. Eunice and Buck exchanged glances. Their gamble had paid off completely. The truth was finally emerging in Millbrook. Judge Harrison's gavel echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. The adoption petition is hereby approved and made permanent. Miss Harper is now legally the daughter of Buck McCree with all attendant rights and protections. The Connor family sat frozen in their front row seats. Their lawyer, Crosswick, gathered his papers with shaking hands. Furthermore, Harrison continued, the evidence presented demands immediate criminal investigation. I'm issuing warrants for the arrest of James Connor, Martha Connor, and their associates on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Sheriff Morrison rose reluctantly from his seat. His family connection to the Connors made the situation deeply uncomfortable, but territorial law left no room for negotiation. Sheriff, you will execute these warrants immediately. Yes, Your Honor. James Connor bolted for the door. He made it 3 steps before Tom Bradley and Robert Chen blocked his path. The miners had waited years for this moment. Going somewhere, James? Tom asked with grim satisfaction. Martha Connor began weeping loudly, but her tears generated no sympathy from the crowd. Too many people had suffered under Connor cruelty for too long. Sheriff Morrison approached the family with handcuffs. His movements were slow, reluctant, but determined. Even family loyalty had limits when faced with overwhelming evidence. James Connor, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, systematic fraud, and worker exploitation. The crowd erupted in cheers. Decades of suppressed anger and frustration poured out in a cathartic roar of approval. Buck placed his hand on Eunice's shoulder. She stood perfectly still, watching justice unfold with quiet satisfaction. How does it feel? He asked. Like Thomas can finally rest in peace. Dr. Morrison approached as the Connor family was led away in shackles. Thank you for giving me the courage to tell the truth. I'll sleep better knowing I finally acted like a real doctor. The courtroom slowly emptied as people returned to their daily routines. But the atmosphere in Millbrook had changed forever. The community's most powerful family was gone, their crimes exposed, their victims vindicated. Pete Morrison stopped at their table. Always knew something wasn't right about that mining accident. Glad someone finally had the backbone to investigate properly. Buck and Eunice gathered their evidence files. Months of careful documentation had achieved its purpose. Justice through law rather than violence. What happens next? Eunice asked. The territorial authorities will conduct formal trials. The evidence we've gathered ensures convictions. Buck smiled. Your investigation work was better than most professional lawmen could manage. They walked home together through streets that felt different, lighter somehow. The oppressive weight of Connor influence had been lifted from the entire community. That evening brought a steady stream of visitors: mine workers, business owners, families who had suffered under Connor exploitation. Each person wanted to express gratitude and share their own stories of abuse. My wages were stolen for 2 years, one man reported. James said the mine was losing money, but he was buying new equipment for his personal ranch. They threatened to fire my husband when I complained about unsafe working conditions, a woman added. Said accidents happen to troublemakers' families. Eunice documented each story carefully. The full scope of Connor criminality would be preserved for the territorial prosecutors. "You're building quite a collection," Buck observed. "Someone needs to remember. Otherwise, it could happen again." A week later, the formal trials began in Denver. Buck and Eunice traveled to the territorial capital to testify as key witnesses. The proceedings attracted significant attention from newspapers across the region. Eunice's testimony was particularly compelling. Her transformation from victim to prosecutor impressed even seasoned legal observers. Several newspapers described her as a remarkable young woman whose courage exposed systematic corruption. The trials lasted 3 weeks. James Connor received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and systematic fraud. Martha Connor got 15 years as an accessory. Their associates received shorter sentences based on their level of involvement. The mining operation was placed under territorial supervision until new management could be established. Worker wages were restored to proper levels, safety violations corrected, stolen money returned when possible. Buck and Eunice returned to Millbrook as local heroes. The community that had once ignored her suffering now treated her with respect and admiration. "Strange how quickly people's attitudes change," she observed. "Success has that effect. But you earned every bit of this respect." Mayor Johnson approached them at the general store. "Miss Harper, the town council has voted unanimously to offer you the position of public advocate, someone to help people navigate legal problems and protect workers' rights." Eunice considered the offer carefully. "I accept, but with conditions. The position must have real authority to investigate complaints and access to territorial legal resources." "Agreed. We don't want another Connor situation." Buck watched with pride as his adopted daughter negotiated her new role. The frightened girl from the town square had become a formidable advocate for justice. That autumn, Eunice established Millbrook's first public legal aid office. People traveled from neighboring towns to seek her assistance with worker disputes, property conflicts, and family problems. Buck served as her legal advisor while she handled day-to-day operations. Their partnership had evolved from rescue to mentorship to equal collaboration. "Thomas would be proud," she said one evening, reviewing case files at their kitchen table. "He is proud, and so am I." Eunice had found her calling. Using the investigation skills developed during months of documenting Connor crimes, she helped dozens of families resolve legal problems that previously seemed hopeless. The Connor house at the end of Main Street sat empty, slowly decaying without maintenance. Children sometimes dared each other to approach the abandoned property, but most people simply ignored it. New families moved to Millbrook as word spread about fair wages and honest management at the mining operation. The town grew, prospered, and developed a reputation for justice rather than corruption. Buck's cabin expanded into a proper home as their legal practice grew. Father and daughter worked side by side, using law and evidence to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. On quiet evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Both had found family, purpose, and peace in the most unexpected circumstances. The old cowboy and the young woman had rewritten their stories and their community's future through courage, intelligence, and unwavering determination to see justice done.